Kia ora koutou. It's lovely to be back here. I mean, I didn't expect to be invited back, but I guess that's a good thing. It's usually a good sign, right? So last year I talked quite a bit around some of the technologies, of course, that were going on. And this year Heidi sort of challenged me and said, can you talk more about how volunteers can use this stuff? And so that's what I want to do. I want to give you a bit of an update on, I guess, where things are at, what the latest sort of scary / exciting things are, but then also some slightly more hands-on stuff, some examples I've put together of how you could use some of these technologies, hopefully for good in your organisations. And of course I can't help but then end on not a downer, but a reminder of some of the risks in the wider context that we all need to be considering, including in the volunteer sector. Is this going to change? Oh my goodness, it works. Curtis already introduced me, so I will leave it there. Well, Curtis and AI. I mean, some of the things that AI said were not quite true, but that's always, it sounds more impressive than it is. It's a good thing. Right, so last year, you may remember, you may not have been here. We talked a little bit about the technology where it was in 2024. Some of the key points, right, things like multimodal AI, which is these types of generative models that can produce text, image, videos. Often, for example, you can put an image into ChatGPT now and it will tell you what's in the image, it will try and analyse it for you. Technology's sort of come a very long way. We've seen some regulation, so the EU AI Act I talked a little bit about last year, that was a really pivotal moment, but we've also started to see the start of almost deregulation, different countries moving backwards. Our friends in America have not necessarily been as progressive as they might have been before, as well as video generation tools as well. And I think these, again, present opportunities for all of us as well as challenges as well. So what's new this year? Have people heard of AI agents? That's a thing that's going around the news and getting really hyped up. The idea we have these little autonomous systems, not like in the real world yet, don't worry, but online, that can go around and do tasks for you. You can sort of leave them to their own devices to do a more complex task at a time, and then they'll come back hopefully with the right answer and not having bought the wrong thing for you online. The demo that always gets used by the tech companies is like booking a trip or something. I always think, I don't trust AI to book me a trip, I'll end up in Australia again. No offence to any Australians here. But of course, this just makes this technology even more powerful and advanced as well. Integrations, so if you have an Android phone, you probably see more Gemini sneaking in there. If you're on an Apple phone, probably Apple Intelligence, which is an interesting take as well, is sneaking in there. So we're seeing it, very much in our lives, whether or not we want it to be. Every time we do a Google search now, right, you see a little AI summary at the top, and it's very hard to opt out of that. And of course, hyper-personalisation. So the more and more sophisticated these systems get, the more they can learn about who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And again, that can be a really cool thing because when you're using these, it can make them more effective. You can get much better outcomes, better language that suits what you want in your organisation or individually, but also can get a little bit creepy too. When it's like talking to ChatGPT and it remembers something from 6 months ago, I'm like, I don't remember that. So we see very much the advancement of this technology and getting more and more mature. And so when Heidi said to me, you've got to talk more about volunteering, I went, okay, cool. And so I asked Gemini, how is a volunteer pool changing? And don't worry, I didn't just copy this, I actually went and checked some of it. That's a key thing to do. And things like these ideas come up. So this idea of episodic volunteering, which sounds like a cool term to me. The idea that people aren't always looking to volunteer for a long period of time, but maybe are looking more at individual opportunities. And that sort of aligns quite well with myself. I have been involved in certain things that have been, like election campaigns and things that are quite short duration. Digital natives, so this is something that Paul talked about a bit, right? We see a lot more people who expect to be engaged online, and if you don't have a website and a good way to sign up for events and to communicate online, then it's very hard to get, especially younger people and people from overseas as well, to be part of that. And also the growth of virtual remote volunteering. So again, we have a lot of people who don't always have the time or the capacity to come and engage physically, planting trees and things, but lots of skills that can be offered remotely as well. And with all of these, we also see ways that AI could also help with this. Of course, you all have limited resources, so what you really want to hear from me is how do we use this cool technology to make our lives easier and get more volunteering done. So here's a few examples of that. So recruitment and screening, so trying to actually find more volunteers, right? That's always a big challenge, is making sure you have a good pool of people that align with your values. How do you reach those people? Well, again, back in the day, it was sort of word of mouth. More recently, of course, things like social media, Facebook pages, Instagram pages. But now, perhaps we can even start to use AI to analyse that for us. So when Paul Spooney talks about how communities are changing, then you can use AI as a way to understand maybe how your community might be changing, and then how best to target your recruitment efforts towards who you're looking for. AI for targeted campaigns to reach the right volunteers, for example. If you have social media advertising or something, how do you design that ad so you have the best uptake and best engagement? Streamline the process, so screening applicants, matching volunteer skills to organisation needs. And this one gets slightly dystopian, but potentially having things like chatbots who can respond to volunteer requests, who can give out more information about organisation, explain ways to get involved. And we'll get into this later, but this is where you start to have to think more about your values and what, as an organisation, is right for you. Because some people very much don't want to be talking to chatbots. I mean, whenever I have to get something fixed online, my first thing I say to chatbots is give me a human, because I've never had good success. But as the technology continues to evolve, maybe there is a role there for it to be used as a way to help streamline the process. Another one, plan and strategy. So for this one, I actually went into Gemini and asked it to do this. I said, act as a non-profit strategy consultant. My organisation is a small community garden in Wellington focused on food security. We need a 2-year volunteer strategy. Brainstorm key sections, objectives, and measurable KPIs. You've got to have a KPI, right? For volunteer recruitment, onboarding, retention, and recognition. And I use Gemini just because that's my latest favourite, but other AI agents are available. And if you click on this link, and I'm going to try and do a live demo here, which is always an awful idea, you will see that it maybe loads. There you go. So this is Gemini loading. And as you can see here, right, this is my, can I zoom in? Oh, look at that. Look at this technology working. You can see that's my query I put in. And so that's literally all I said to it. And then it says, of course, I'll help you. Always very keen to help. Here's a brainstorm framework outlining these things. If you scroll down, it gives you some mission alignment, some overall principles. And then it goes through one by one each of those things I asked for and gives me some initiatives. So for volunteer recruitment, what would one initiative be? Hyper-local community outreach. Place flyers and posters on community notice boards. So that's quite interesting, right? Because this is saying, go back to the real world and put flyers out there, because that's still quite an effective tool, as well as things like digital presence. So post on social media groups like Vic Deals. If you're from Wellington, you probably know Vic Deals is an interesting place, but it's also quite good for finding people who are like-minded. Community pages, Volunteer Wellington, there you go. Anyone from Volunteer Wellington here? Yeah, woo, good. Can't have Auckland get all the hype. And Neighbourly, which is where, of course, a lot of people also look. Strategic partnerships, so working with Victoria University, Massey University, as well. Hosting garden open days, so again, showing people, what they could get out of it, what the benefits are, right? And so you can see there's also some KPIs, how 2 volunteer university group volunteer days per year. I mean, Vic Uni, we have 1 day a year we get a volunteer leave. And so often, if you connect with universities, you can get academics who probably aren't that helpful in gardens, but at least are excited out there to, maybe think about how you might prune something. And it goes on and on, right? And so you can get a screed of information just from a very simple query like that one. And let's see now how I get back to my slides. And I can also do something like, okay, you've given me this information, but I don't want to read all that. I want sort of a high-level view so I can share it with my board or my my colleagues. And so I say, please summarise in the table, and then it will give you those sort of 4 pillars, and then for each of them, the main objective, your key initiatives, and then those sort of KPIs. So for recruitment, we're trying to attract diverse volunteers, right? We want to represent our community. Initiatives, things like local outreach, digital presence, KPIs, so 5 new locations per quarter. You put up those posters in different places every quarter. You're building up that awareness, and a 10% social media engagement increase. And these may or may not be perfect. They probably aren't, but it can give you sort of a starting point to think about maybe what that strategy looks like. If you don't have a background, then maybe this is a way for you to get an initial idea. Likewise, for fundraising and media, another example. So generate a fundraising plan for a local animal shelter aiming to raise $20,000 for a new facility. Suggest a mix of digital campaigns, a community adoption event, and local business partnership ideas. And again, if you click on the link, which you can do in your own time, you get a very detailed one talking about the breakdown, where the money's going to come from, and how best to advertise as well. And it can even make you a logo. I mean, I don't think that's the best logo I've seen, but you could, yeah. But the thing I don't show here is that you could then, politely go back to the Gemini and say, your logo's not great, can you improve these things and refine and iterate on it, right? So it's not always a one and done. Sometimes it's give the AI a bit more confidence that it can do it and improve itself. And it's, it tells you the blue gradient is trustworthy and professional, while the clean, modern design ensures it's versatile for all your marketing needs. So you get a little bit of nonsense as well, but. And of course, social media posts. So that is the whole sort of art or science of writing social media posts is quite hard sometimes. And again, you can give it, we're having this event, can you write me a post that I could use to put on Facebook that would be good for this audience? You can give it those things and it will give you a post. Hot tip, if you do that, make sure you remove the date, like you replace the date, time, location placeholders, because yeah, that's not a good way to get volunteers. And it will give you an image as well, which again, I would probably discourage that, because people actually want to see where they'll be and they want to connect with the environment. So be a little bit careful with that. But again, it's a way to get yourself started and to save you some time. But, and here's my but, we can't forget the human. So are we augmenting people or are we replacing people, right? Because this is an issue we see, I guess, throughout society, but also in the volunteer sector. We all know that you are all time poor, resource poor, so AI could help you a lot. But if you're saving volunteers time by using AI, what are they going to do instead? And often it might be quite clear what they can do instead. Maybe they get more time to go out to the community, they get more time to talk to people and to do the hard mahi at the heart of volunteering. But sometimes you can accidentally or inadvertently displace people from how they can best contribute. So I actually have a little anecdote which I'll share about this. So a few years ago I was involved in an election campaign as the tech guy. It's a sort of a professional hazard. And so we were doing door knocking. Well, I wasn't doing door knocking, people were doing door knocking. They don't let me out of the office. To record visits to potential voters, right? And so I noticed that the software we were using, there's an option in there to actually be able to scan those door knocking sheets and automatically analyse all of them. I thought, oh my God, that's saved a bunch of time. But then we sort of had a chat about that, and then we realised that the people who were doing the manual data entry were often, people who felt safe at home and didn't really want to go out and do door knocking, or people who had disabilities and couldn't really, contribute in that way. And if we had replaced them with this automated system, then they themselves would no longer feel they were part of that campaign or able to contribute. And so when we talk about using AI, there is that very real human element, which is, who are you potentially replacing? Are you augmenting people? Is there some way that we could upskill those people to use that new technology to contribute in a different way? But we need to have that conversation and think about that before we just go ahead and do it. Because the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, in any sector, but in the volunteer sector, right, is to replace someone and then try and fix it afterwards, because that's just not, I don't think that's not the values we hold. So some guiding questions, I guess, when you think about using AI. So how will you upskill volunteers to use it or to do new tasks? So if people are going to use it, do they have the skills? Do they have the understanding of how it can make mistakes or how it can be perceived? What if some of your volunteers don't want to use it? So something I haven't touched on here is a big concern around environmental costs of AI, especially in the younger generation. We see a lot of people concerned about that, as well as moral, ethical concerns. So, this has been trained on data without people's permission a lot of the time, especially authors. And so if you have members of your community who don't like it and are against it morally, religiously, what do you do about that? What sort of oversight do you have in place? So as I said, these systems are not perfect. You've heard the term hallucination probably. And how are you going to disclose it? So again, I think being upfront and being transparent around how you use these things is a really important part of getting acceptance and using it safely. Of course, there's other risks that I also talked about last year. So we know that these models can be biased. They can give you different results with different demographics, privacy concerns. We've seen some leaks and other things, and over-dependency. So, as you use these tools more and more, if you don't use them appropriately, you can actually you can sort of lose some of those cognitive skills that you've gained through doing things yourself. So when you think about critical thinking, sanity checking things, if you just go, the machine said this, I'm going to do that if you do that too much, it can actually be sort of harmful. So I guess my message here is augmenting, not replacing, and don't, just because it's easier to do it with AI doesn't mean that you should. So what should you do now? Despite all that, I still encourage you to experiment boldly, but again, start small. Don't, suddenly automate your whole social media campaign, but maybe when you next do a social media post, compare your one with what the AI would have created and see how that compares. Or try one AI-assisted post and see how it plays out. Foster literacy, so encourage your team to learn and play with these tools, create a space for sharing what works. We see a lot of the time that the sort of grassroots approach is best, trying to set rules from up high and say this is how you should use AI. You can have some principles, but the actual doing of it is often best done organically, because that's when you discover what works for people. And have some guidelines. So how do you use it? How do you disclose it? What are your guiding principles as an organisation to use it appropriately? So I will leave it there, but before I do, shout out for myself kind of. So we have an open letter calling on politicians to regulate AI. As Paul said, the government does a lot of things badly, and one of the things, sorry, you didn't exactly say that, but one of the things they're doing badly at the moment is not regulating AI in an appropriate way. So we have an open letter there if you'd like to look at that too. But otherwise, I will leave it there.
Kia ora, Andrew. Jane Treadwell-Hoy from Good Bitches Baking. Quick question. We had an interesting conversation with my Marcoms manager last week about if we're a values-led organisation, how can we engage with the technology that's doing so much damage to the planet, and the cost of the impact on the environment and that sort of thing. I use AI. I will put my hand up and say I use it a lot, but she has raised a really valid question, and we're in the process of redesigning our ethics policies for our board at the moment. We've got a big ethics meeting. This is on the table. Really interested in your views on the balance between using the technology alongside the real danger and damage it's doing to the planet.
And that's a conversation that comes up regularly. I have a lot of views, of course, but one of the things I like to share is, I guess, a frustration around how the big tech companies who make this technology are sort of forcing us to feel bad about how we're using it at a very low level. And so when I think about, our university works on Microsoft, and I've seen Copilot jammed into everything possible. I don't want it there, but it's still there, and I'm being forced to use it. And so the sort of the environmental damage being done by the tech companies trying to make us use it in everything, I think is a lot bigger than these individual decisions we make to use it for very specific purposes. And so I think if we want to sort of seriously think about the environmental impact, we actually need to tackle that bigger picture of your OpenAI, your Google, your Microsoft, just ramming it down our throats, so to speak, for their own profits, and not sort of demonise the individuals who are using it, again, for, in mahi for good, right? If this is helping you to improve your volunteering, I think you can understand yourself that balance is probably going the right way. And so that's my general perspective. In terms of the costs, the numbers, statistics vary, but there is some evidence that those costs are coming down, and then there's other evidence that maybe they're going up. So when you look at things like using text, which we've done here, that's quite low impact, but then video generation, which is the latest hot thing we're seeing, that is a lot more intensive. So, and also I think a lot more unnecessary and more like spooky as well. And so text, images, that sort of area, I feel reasonably comfortable recommending it, but again, it's appropriate use and having those conversations.
We've got a couple of questions on this side, Andrew. I'll start here.
Kia ora. Actually, I do have two questions, and one is maybe something that Paul would have been able to answer, but is there a statistic around the number of people who distrust AI, who are likely to put a comment underneath your Facebook post saying, ooh, yuck, AI?
So, yes, 66% of New Zealanders don't trust AI. Yeah, I'm glad I got that on my head. And I think the survey that was from, we were second lowest out of 47 countries, and the lowest was Ireland, and it wasn't a big difference. So New Zealanders, Kiwis, have an inherent distrust of AI, and the reasons for that are not entirely obvious. That maybe a new technology is always a bit scary. I'm not trying to minimise it, but yeah, that would be the number. And again, for my plug, 80% of New Zealanders want to see more regulation as well. So at the moment, 66% of people in this room should be against AI or not trusting of it. And I don't think, sorry, a bit of spiel, I don't think that distrust is a bad thing, right? Because it's a very healthy thing to not have trust, but especially where we see where this technology is coming from. And so I think it's actually really good to keep a little bit of distrust, which I also have, because the impacts, as we've discussed, can be quite big. Yeah.
Thank you. And the other question, is there anything that you can see potentially on the horizon that would lead you to come here and do a presentation that said, I don't encourage you to use AI?
Well, I already don't encourage people to use it without thinking carefully about why they're using it. And so I suppose that that continuum maybe I could move along on. I would probably say I wouldn't encourage people to use the video generation stuff, just because I think that presents way too many issues in the sort of the creative industries and what is human versus AI generated. Like, I think those sort of issues, and again the energy usage, but something's in the mainframe.
Ghost in the machine.
I've been dissing it too much. Yeah, and so I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
Cool. Another one here, Andrew.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rosalind Hefatuko from Department of Corrections. And I love AI, but like you, I think it does need to be used very carefully. And I wondered if you have any advice around, because once you put information in, whether it's private or confidential or commercially sensitive, it becomes public, through AI. And how are these systems, or, I mean, obviously organisations can develop policies and regulations for themselves, but are these systems that you can use to help protect the information, to keep it private?
Yeah, so that's a good point to raise as well, because a lot of people aren't aware that when you use the free versions of ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever flavour you prefer, that you're usually consenting to them using that data either to train on, so to make the next version, or sometimes quite carte blanche to use however they see fit. And so if you are using a free version, don't put something sensitive in it. I guess this is where the sort of the enterprise pro licenses come in. So one of the reasons that Microsoft Copilot is so embedded in everything is because most of the New Zealand government and the public sector and many private companies use Microsoft, and they have terms in their agreement that basically says they're not going to use our inputs to AI to train on or spread them anywhere else. And there is, even though there's a contractual agreement, there still is trust there, in that you are assuming they won't have a leak, or something won't go wrong. And so that's sort of the best we have is these agreements that say we promise we won't. And I mean, Microsoft has enough of a reputation to maintain it. Probably they wouldn't. But if you are using another model, that even a paid version, you need to be quite careful. And I guess it's that risk management stuff, right? It's what would be the risk if this goes wrong, and I guess that's the best advice I can give.
Sure. We've just got 2 more questions, Andrew.
Yep.
If you need to re-invoice for the additional time for these questions, I'm comfortable with that. That's okay.
I'm not being paid. Is everyone else being paid?
Kia ora. My question is, I guess I've noticed a few companies adding AI to their organisation charts, and I just wondered if you had any comments on that.
So in terms of tech companies or just general? General. Yeah. There is certainly a bit of FOMO, I think, where companies who don't somehow add AI are seen to be falling behind and will make their shareholders unhappy because of that. I guess and there's been a lot of talk actually in the last few weeks, months around it being an AI bubble and whether or not this is all going to implode because NVIDIA, which is who makes the AI chips, is now has the highest market cap in the world. And so I think there is actually also a risk of being too into AI when it's not clearly part of your sort of business as usual, because there is a reputational risk and that people still have this about it. And also there's a risk that if this bubble does pop, then you're sort of stuck with this big AI thing that maybe no one really is interested in anymore. But yeah, a lot of it is just FOMO, and if we don't put AI in our company, then we're not a modern company. And it's kind of like what we had with, well, it didn't really get there with crypto. That was always like a more edgy thing. But you know, you see this pattern in tech, right, where the latest thing comes out and all the companies go, oh, I better not miss out on being in that space.
One more over here.
Kia ora, Andrew. I'm Charlotte Gordon from Belong Aotearoa. We work in the space of refugee and migrant communities. And I'm interested to know your thoughts on the future of AI in language and translation services. Right now, a lot of the communities we work with struggle to get translation in the health system, in the school system, and conversely, organisations that work with refugee and migrant communities struggle to translate or to afford translation services. So I'm wondering if there's a possible AI solution to some of these problems.
Yeah, and that's something I didn't get to show today, but if I had those examples I showed, if I said, give it to me in Mandarin or Cantonese or Vietnamese, it would give me the same or similar response, but in that language. And so these technologies already support translation sort of out of the box. And so there is, again, a lot of opportunity there. Like if you are making a social media post and you want it to be, you know, for the Chinese community, then you can think about using ChatGPT or AI to translate it for you. Of course, the question then is who can check it's accurate or it hasn't said something slightly strange, or and so there's still that issue, I suppose. But it is potentially a really cool opportunity as a way to communicate with people across different cultures by using these sort of services. There's also live translation tools, like if you have Gemini on your phone, you can use it to translate a real-time conversation. And so potentially a good way to break down barriers as well, but with all the normal caveats, of course.
Cool.
Done?
Thank you, Andrew. I actually got a quick question. Do you think there's a future for AI MCs? And if so, how do we stop that from happening?
I don't think we can replace you. You're too, because a good part of being an MC is making some mistakes, right? And
Rosalie. Dr. Andrew Lensen, everybody.